There are ways of thinking that make people uncomfortable, thought patterns that seem strange, obsessive, or disconnected from reality. But neuroscience reveals these exact mental processes are how genius actually works. The thinking patterns that make you seem weird aren't cognitive flaws. They're the mechanisms that separate exceptional minds from ordinary ones. In 1905, Albert Einstein was working as a patent clerk because no university would hire him. His professors thought he was difficult and unfocused. He'd spend hours imagining what it would be like to ride alongside a beam of light. His colleagues thought he was wasting time on nonsensical daydreams. 4 months later, he published the theory of special relativity that revolutionized physics. His daydreams weren't distractions. They were thought experiments. His brain needed to solve problems conventional thinking couldn't touch. In 1997, Jeff Bezos was told by every business advisor that his plan for Amazon was insane. Online bookstores would never work. Losing money for years while building infrastructure was financial suicide. He thought in decades, while others thought in quarters. He saw systems and connections that seemed delusional to conventional thinkers. 25 years later, Amazon is worth $1.3 trillion. His crazy thinking pattern was long-term systems thinking that others couldn't comprehend. In 2007, Elon Musk announced plans to build electric cars, reusable rockets, and solar energy systems simultaneously. Automotive experts said electric cars would never be mainstream. Aerospace engineers said reusable rockets were impossible. Energy specialists said solar would never be cost-effective. Musk's brain connected technologies across unrelated fields and saw possibilities that specialists trapped in narrow thinking couldn't imagine. His companies are now worth over $800 billion combined. But here's what should make you reconsider every normal thinking pattern you've been taught. The mental processes that lead to revolutionary breakthroughs aren't logical, linear, or conventional. They're strange, obsessive, and often appear irrational to people with ordinary minds. The thinking patterns you've been told to suppress or fix might be the exact cognitive mechanisms that enable genius-level innovation. This is 7 thinking patterns that only genius people have. Why each one produces breakthrough insights that conventional thinking can't reach, and why the people telling you to think normally are accidentally trying to make you stupider. 1. Obsessive pattern recognition. Seeing connections that don't exist until they do. Your brain constantly identifies patterns, connections, and similarities across completely unrelated domains. You see how a biological system relates to a computer algorithm, how a historical event mirrors a current situation, how a mathematical principle applies to social dynamics. People tell you you're reading too much into things or overthinking. Your brain can't stop. Pattern recognition is the foundation of all creative insight. A 2019 study at Carnegie Mellon found that highly creative people have brains that make more distant associations between concepts than average people. Their neural networks connect areas that normally don't communicate. When you see a pattern between biology and computer science, you're not imagining things. Your brain is genuinely processing similarities that exist, but most people can't perceive. Steve Jobs famously connected calligraphy classes he took in college to computer typography years later, creating the Mac's revolutionary font system. He saw a pattern between artistic letter forms and digital design that no computer engineer recognized. Charles Darwin connected barnacle anatomy, pigeon breeding, and coral reef formation into a unified theory of evolution. The connections were always there. His brain just processed them when others couldn't. But here's why this pattern seems crazy. Most people's brains filter aggressively to reduce cognitive load. They focus narrowly on their specific domain and ignore everything else. When you start talking about how a biological immune system relates to cybersecurity architecture, they don't see it because their neural pathways don't connect those domains. They think you're making meaningless associations. You're actually seeing structural similarities that exist at a deeper level than surface categories. Your brain never shuts off. You can't watch a movie without analyzing its narrative structure and connecting it to psychological principles. You can't have a simple conversation without noticing linguistic patterns. Everything becomes data. Everything connects. It's exhausting, but it's also how breakthrough insights happen by connecting domains that conventional thinking keeps separate. 2. Contradictory thinking, holding opposite ideas simultaneously without discomfort. You can simultaneously believe two contradictory things and not feel cognitive dissonance. You understand that free will and determinism might both be true, that capitalism has created enormous wealth while also causing enormous harm, that people can be both good and terrible. Normal people find this uncomfortable and demand you pick a side. Your brain doesn't work that way. Fetho Scott Fitzgerald wrote, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." Psychologists call this cognitive complexity or integrative thinking. A 2016 study found that people who can maintain contradictory beliefs simultaneously score higher on creativity tests and generate more innovative solutions to problems. Niels Bohr, the physicist, famously said, "The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement." But the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. Quantum mechanics required accepting that particles are both waves and particles simultaneously, a contradiction that seems impossible but describes reality. Werner Heisenberg developed uncertainty principles by embracing the contradiction that observing something changes it. Conventional thinkers reject contradictions. Geniuses use them to discover deeper truths. But here's why normal people can't do this. Human brains crave consistency. Cognitive dissonance, holding contradictory beliefs, creates psychological discomfort that most people resolve by rejecting one idea or the other. Black or white, good or bad, true or false. This binary thinking is comfortable, but intellectually limiting. Your brain's ability to hold contradictions means you can process reality's complexity without forcing it into simplistic categories. People accuse you of being wishy-washy, uncommitted, or refusing to take positions. They want clear answers. You give nuanced analysis that acknowledges competing truths. They interpret this as weakness or confusion. You're actually demonstrating cognitive sophistication that they lack. But it makes you seem indecisive to people who need certainty. 3. Constant mental simulation. Your brain runs endless what-if scenarios. You can't stop running simulations in your head. What if I said this instead of that? What if this meeting goes badly? What if this project succeeds beyond expectations? What if I quit my job tomorrow? Your brain generates hundreds of alternate scenarios automatically. People tell you to stop worrying or live in the moment. You're not worrying, you're simulating. Mental simulation is how strategic thinking works. Chess grandmasters don't just see the current board, they're simultaneously running 20-plus future scenarios to evaluate possible moves. A 2018 study at MIT found that people who naturally engage in frequent mental simulation score significantly higher on strategic planning and long-term thinking assessments. Jeff Bezos calls this working backwards from the future. Amazon's entire strategy involves imagining future scenarios and building systems to win in those scenarios before competitors even see them coming. Elon Musk's first principles thinking involves mentally simulating how technologies could work if current constraints were removed. Military strategists run war games, mental simulations of conflict scenarios to identify weaknesses before real battles occur. But here's what separates genius simulation from anxiety. Anxious people run worst-case scenarios and get trapped in fear. Genius-level simulation runs multiple scenarios, best case, worst case, unexpected case, and uses them for strategic planning. You're not catastrophizing. You're mentally stress-testing ideas before reality does it for you. You're identifying failure points before you commit resources. You're seeing opportunities others miss because you've already simulated the future they haven't imagined yet. You seem hesitant or over-analytical to people who make quick decisions based on gut feeling. They see decisiveness as strength. You see simulated scenarios they never considered. By the time you make a decision, you've already mentally explored 50 alternatives. This looks like overthinking. It's actually computational intelligence that most brains can't perform. 4. Recursive meta-thinking, thinking about your thinking. You don't just think, you analyze how you're thinking while you're thinking. You notice your own cognitive biases in real time. You catch yourself making assumptions and question them mid-thought. You think about why you're thinking about something and whether your thought process is valid. It's like having a running commentary on your own mental processes. People find this exhausting to listen to. Your brain does it automatically. This is called metacognition. Thinking about thinking, and it's one of the strongest predictors of learning ability and problem solving. A 2017 study at University College London found that people with stronger metacognitive abilities perform better on complex cognitive tasks, even when their baseline IQ is controlled for. Metacognition is intelligence monitoring itself. Richard Feynman, the physicist, famously wrote about watching his own thought processes like a scientist observing an experiment. He'd notice when his intuition was leading him wrong and consciously override it. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, built his investment strategy around identifying cognitive biases and developing mental models to counteract them. They don't just think, they observe themselves thinking and adjust in real time. But here's why this makes normal people uncomfortable. Most people experience their thoughts as reality. I think this, therefore it's true. Metacognitive thinkers experience thoughts as hypotheses to be evaluated. I think this. But why do I think this? Is this thought valid? What assumptions am I making? This creates uncertainty that most people find intolerable. They want to trust their instincts. You question your instincts as a default mode. You seem indecisive or lacking confidence because you're always questioning your own thinking. People want you to commit to positions. You're busy evaluating whether your position is based on valid reasoning or cognitive bias. This recursive thinking is intellectually honest, but socially awkward. Most people don't want their thinking questioned, especially by someone doing it to themselves in real time. 5. Systemic thinking, seeing everything as interconnected systems. You can't look at anything in isolation. When someone proposes a solution to a problem, you immediately see the second-order effects, unintended consequences, and systemic impacts. You don't see individual events. You see feedback loops, cascading effects, and emergent properties. People think you're being negative when you point out problems with simple solutions. You're seeing complexity they don't perceive. Systems thinking is how you understand complex phenomena that linear thinking can't grasp. A 2020 study at MIT found that people who naturally think in systems consistently outperform others in predicting long-term outcomes of policy decisions, business strategies, and technological changes. They don't predict better because they're smarter. They predict better because they model complexity that others reduce to simplicity. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund, on principles-based systems thinking. He doesn't predict individual market movements. He models economic systems and invests based on systematic relationships. Donella Meadows, the systems scientist, wrote Thinking in Systems, which explains how complex phenomena from ecosystems to economies operate through feedback loops that conventional thinking misses. They succeeded by seeing systems where others saw isolated events. But here's why this frustrates normal thinkers. Linear thinking is comfortable. Problem-solution success. Systems thinking is uncomfortable. Problem-solution, unintended consequence. When someone says, just raise the minimum wage, systems thinkers immediately see employment effects, price effects, automation incentives, regional variations, and feedback loops. Linear thinkers think you're being difficult. You're being accurate. You seem like you're always finding problems with ideas instead of offering solutions. People want simple answers. You can't give simple answers because you see complex systems. They interpret this as negativity or overcomplication. You're actually preventing failures they can't anticipate because their thinking doesn't model complexity. 6. Temporal distortion, thinking in multiple timescales simultaneously. Your brain operates in multiple time horizons at once. You're thinking about what you need to do in the next hour while simultaneously considering how this decision affects you in 5 years. You see immediate tactics, medium-term strategy, and long-term consequences simultaneously. People living in the present find this incomprehensible. You can't not think this way. Multi-time scale thinking is how strategic leaders operate. A 2019 Harvard Business Review study found that CEOs who think in multiple time horizons simultaneously make better decisions than those who focus on single time frames. They balance short-term execution with long-term vision without sacrificing either. Jeff Bezos is famous for thinking in decades while executing in days. Amazon loses money on shipping because Bezos is thinking 10 years ahead when customer loyalty compounds into market dominance. Warren Buffett invests based on 30-year horizons while monitoring daily market movements. Naval Ravikant talks about playing long-term games with long-term people. His brain automatically evaluates short-term actions through long-term consequences. But here's why this alienates you from most people. Most people live in immediate time horizons. They make decisions based on what feels good now or what solves today's problem. When you make a decision based on where you want to be in 5 years, they think you're overthinking or being impractical. They can't hold multiple timescales in their head simultaneously. You can't not do it. You seem impractical or disconnected from immediate reality. People want you to focus on right now. Your brain is balancing now with later, with much later automatically. This makes you seem distant, overly strategic, or out of touch with present concerns. You're actually integrating time frames that they process separately. Conceptual abstraction, thinking in pure concepts detached from concrete examples. You naturally think in abstract principles rather than concrete specifics. When someone tells you a story, you immediately extract the underlying pattern and apply it to completely different situations. You think in models, frameworks, and conceptual structures. People tell stories. You hear universal principles. They want you to engage with specifics. Your brain automatically converts everything into abstractions. Abstract thinking is how you discover universal principles that apply across domains. A 2021 study in Nature Neuroscience found that people who naturally engage in abstract thinking show greater activation in prefrontal cortex regions associated with higher-order cognition. They're not just processing information, they're extracting metapatterns. Einstein didn't discover relativity by studying specific experiments. He discovered it by thinking about abstract principles of space, time, and the speed of light. Philosophers from Plato to Kant worked entirely in abstract concepts to develop frameworks for understanding reality. Charlie Munger's mental model's approach to investing is pure abstraction. He extracts principles from psychology, physics, and biology and applies them to markets. But here's why concrete thinkers find this alien. Most people think in specific examples. They need concrete cases to understand ideas. When you immediately jump to abstract principles, they feel lost. Can you give me an example? They ask. You already gave them the principle, which is more useful than any example. But principles feel vague to people whose brains need concrete details to process information. Concrete advice. You give them conceptual frameworks that would solve infinite specific problems if they understood them. They don't understand them because their thinking stays concrete. You seem impractical when you're actually giving them tools more powerful than specific solutions. Why these patterns make you seem crazy, but make you capable of genius. Here's the brutal truth about genius-level thinking. It's incompatible with normal social interaction. Every pattern on this list makes you difficult to understand, frustrating to communicate with, and seemingly disconnected from everyday concerns. You see patterns others don't see. They think you're making things up. You hold contradictions others can't tolerate. They think you're indecisive. You simulate scenarios others don't consider. They think you're overthinking. You think about your thinking. They find it exhausting. You see systems. They see simple cause and effect. They think you're impractical. You think abstractly. They want concrete examples. But here's what research consistently shows. The thinking patterns that make you socially awkward are the exact patterns that produce breakthrough insights, revolutionary innovations, and paradigm-shifting ideas. Einstein, Jobs, Bezos, Musk, they all think in ways that made people uncomfortable. That discomfort isn't proof they're wrong. It's proof they're operating at a cognitive level most people can't access. Normal thinking produces normal results. You follow established patterns. You think linearly. You stay concrete. You focus on immediate time frames. You avoid contradictions. You trust your first thoughts. This is comfortable. This is socially acceptable. This produces incremental improvements and conventional outcomes. Genius thinking produces revolutionary results. You connect distant concepts. You embrace contradictions. You simulate futures. You question your own thinking. You model systems. You integrate time frames. You think in abstractions. This is uncomfortable. This makes people think you're weird. This is how you see possibilities that don't exist yet, and solutions that others can't imagine. The system is designed for average thinking. School rewards students who think linearly and follow established procedures. Workplaces promote people who fit cultural norms and think like everyone else. Society values clear, simple, confident answers even when reality is complex, contradictory, and uncertain. Your thinking patterns don't fit that system. You're not broken. The system isn't designed for how your brain works. You're designed for breakthrough thinking that the system doesn't know how to evaluate or reward until after the breakthrough happens and everyone pretends they saw it coming. The choice every genius-level thinker faces. You have two options. You can suppress these thinking patterns to fit in. Stop seeing patterns. Avoid contradictions. Don't simulate. Trust your intuitions. Focus on now. Stay concrete. Be normal. This will make you more socially comfortable. People will understand you better. You'll seem more decisive, more practical, more relatable. You'll fit the mold of what society expects thinking to look like. But you'll also eliminate the cognitive mechanisms that make genius possible. You can't pattern match your way to revolutionary insights with conventional thinking. You can't hold contradictions and discover profound truths with binary thinking. You can't see systemic effects with linear thinking. You can't think strategically with immediate time frames. You can't discover universal principles with concrete thinking, or you can embrace these patterns and accept the consequences. You'll seem strange. People will misunderstand you. You'll frustrate those who want simple answers. You'll be accused of overthinking, being too theoretical, too negative, too hesitant, too weird, but you'll also maintain the cognitive capabilities that enable breakthrough thinking. The patterns that make you socially awkward are the patterns that let you see what others miss, solve what others can't, and create what others won't imagine. Every genius in history faced this choice. Jobs was called an obsessive micromanager. Musk is called crazy regularly. They chose their thinking patterns over social comfort. They chose capability over conformity. The strange thinking patterns that make you different aren't cognitive defects to fix. They're cognitive capabilities that most people don't have. The people telling you to think normally are, usually without realizing it, telling you to think worse. Your thinking patterns aren't the problem. The problem is a world designed by and for average thinking that doesn't know how to recognize, value, or utilize genius-level cognitive patterns until after they've produced results that can't be ignored. The patterns seem strange because they're rare. They're rare because they're hard. They're hard because they're powerful, and they're powerful because they're how genius actually works, not in flashes of inspiration, but in daily thinking patterns that most people's brains aren't wired to sustain. Keep the patterns. The world needs them more than it needs you to be comfortable.